At 1 a.m., a broke student convinced his wealthy roommate to break every rule and slip into a forbidden wilderness to hunt for rumored ancient ruins. Just as they celebrated finding massive, a weak cry ripped through the night. An old man was dying in a hidden crevice beneath their feet. Then the sky exploded. Rain pounding the mountain, rocks shifting. In minutes they had to choose. Leave him and live, or stay and risk dying. What happened next changed their lives forever. Before diving into this story, tell us, what's the most unforgettable trip you've ever taken? Drop it in the comments. Eli Turner had learned to survive long before he learned to dream. Growing up in the South Side projects, where gunshots punctuated summer nights and winter meant choosing between heat or food, he developed instincts that college kids from comfortable homes would never understand. His mother worked 3 jobs to keep their small apartment, and his grandmother, before she passed, had filled their cramped living room with stories of ancient civilizations, tales that transported young Eli far beyond the cracked sidewalks and chain-link fences of his neighborhood. Those stories became his escape, then his obsession. While other kids played basketball in the park, Eli sat in the public library until closing time, devouring books about lost cities and buried treasures. He studied until his eyes burned, earned perfect grades, and somehow, miraculously, landed a full scholarship to the university. At 19, he was the first person in his family to attend college, carrying not just his own dreams but the weight of everyone who believed in him. Mark Dawson, on the other hand, had never needed to fight for anything in his life. The only son of Richard Dawson, founder of Dawson Property Group, one of the largest real estate empires on the East Coast, Mark had grown up in a world where problems dissolved with a phone call and desires materialized with a credit card swipe. His childhood home had more bathrooms than Eli's entire apartment building. Private tutors, European vacations, a different luxury car for his 16th birthday than his 18th. Mark's life was a carefully curated exhibition of wealth. But money, as Mark was slowly realizing, couldn't buy purpose. At 19, he drifted through university classes with the same passive indifference he'd shown toward everything else. His father had insisted on business management, so Mark attended lectures without really listening, completed assignments without really caring, and collected decent grades through sheer proximity to education rather than any genuine effort. He was pleasant enough, not arrogant like some rich kids, just fundamentally unmotivated, a ship without a rudder floating on an ocean of privilege. They'd met during freshman orientation, an unlikely pairing that confused everyone, including themselves. Eli had been standing alone, studying the campus map with an intensity that suggested he was memorizing enemy territory. Mark, surrounded by a cluster of students who laughed too loudly at his jokes and seemed overly interested in his weekend plans, had noticed Eli's solitude and recognized something familiar in it, the isolation of being different, even if their differences came from opposite directions. "You lost?" Mark had asked, approaching with a casualness that his new admirers found magnetically confident. Eli had looked up, assessed Mark's expensive jacket and easy smile with the quick judgment of someone who'd learned to read people for survival. "No, just getting my bearings. First day's overwhelming, right? I'm Mark." Eli. They'd talked for 20 minutes, Mark asking genuine questions instead of performing for an audience, Eli answering with a directness that felt refreshing after a day of superficial pleasantries. By the end of orientation week, while Mark's collection of hangers-on continued to multiply, he found himself seeking out Eli's company more than anyone else's. Eli was real in a way that others weren't. He didn't care about Mark's last name or his father's net worth. He cared about ideas, about history, about things that mattered. For Mark, Eli was the first real friend he'd ever had. Now 9 months into their friendship, they sat together in Professor Mitchell's environmental science class, suffering through the announcement that would inadvertently change both their lives. "The overnight field trip to Mount Harrison is mandatory," Professor Mitchell was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone teachers use when they expect resistance. 20% of your final grade. We leave Friday at 6 a.m., return Sunday evening." Mark leaned toward Eli, whispering, "This sounds like my personal nightmare." "It's one weekend," Eli whispered back, but his attention was already elsewhere. Mount Harrison. He'd read something about Mount Harrison recently. That evening, Eli sat in his dorm room with his laptop and library books. He'd remembered correctly, there was a reference in an obscure regional history journal about potential archaeological sites near Mount Harrison. Nothing confirmed, nothing excavated, just a footnote mentioning indigenous artifacts found by hikers in the 18th. Eli's heart began to race. Nobody had followed up on this. The site was remote, probably untouched, possibly significant. This field trip wasn't just a mandatory class assignment, it was an opportunity. He called Mark immediately. "Hey man, what's up?" Mark's voice was nearly drowned out by music and laughter in the background. "Can you talk? I found something. Information about a potential archaeological site near where we're going." There was a pause. "Okay, I want to go look for it. I'd need to separate from the group. Maybe overnight, Eli." Mark's voice shifted to concerned. "That's against all the rules." "I know, but, and there are bears. Mountain lions. People die in the woods. I've researched the route, I have survival skills. Why can't you come back later with actual archaeologists?" Eli closed his eyes, searching for words. "Mark, do you know what it's like to want something so badly it aches, to have one chance to touch something real and meaningful?" Silence. "This is my field. I've read about other people's discoveries my entire life. This could be mine. My contribution. Do you understand?" More silence, then finally, "No, honestly I don't really understand wanting anything that much. But you're going regardless of what I say, aren't you?" "Yes, then I guess I can't talk you out of it. Just be careful, okay?" They hung up, and Eli returned to his maps and research, adrenaline already building for Friday night. What Eli didn't know was that Mark wouldn't sleep well for the next 3 days, anxiety gnawing at him every time he thought about his friend wandering alone through the wilderness. And what neither of them knew was that Mark's fear would prove stronger than his common sense, leading him to make a decision that would save 2 lives and change both of them forever. The first day of the field trip was exactly as boring as Mark had predicted. They'd hiked gentle trails, identified plants, tested soil samples, and listened to Professor Mitchell explain erosion patterns with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved rocks. Mark had trudged through it all with weary compliance, staying close to Eli, who seemed barely able to contain his impatience. By dinner, hot dogs cooked over a campfire that park rangers had prepared, Mark had noticed Eli's repeated glances toward the eastern ridge, the way he kept checking his GPS watch, the nervous energy practically vibrating off him. "Tonight?" Mark had whispered. Eli nodded, not meeting his eyes. "Around 1 a.m., everyone should be asleep by then." "This is insane." "I know." Later in their shared tent, Mark lay in his sleeping bag, staring at the tent ceiling, and listening to Eli's deliberately steady breathing. His friend wasn't asleep. Neither was Mark. The minutes crawled past. Around them the campsite gradually quieted as conversations died out and flashlights clicked off one by one. The forest filled with its nighttime symphony, crickets, distant owl hoots, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, and somewhere far off, the lonely call of a coyote. At exactly 1 a.m., Eli's sleeping bag rustled. Mark heard the quiet sound of a zipper, the careful movements of someone trying not to wake anyone. "Eli," Mark whispered. His friend froze. "I thought you were asleep." "How could I sleep? You're about to do something completely reckless." "I'll be fine. I have my phone, GPS, a compass, and if you're not fine, who's going to know where to look for you?" Eli hesitated, barely visible in the darkness. "Mark, I have to do this. I know." Mark sat up, his heart pounding with a decision he knew was stupid but couldn't ignore. "That's why I'm coming with you." "What? No. Absolutely not. You can't stop me." "Mark, you don't have any wilderness experience. You'll slow me down. You could get hurt. Then you better make sure I don't." Mark was already pulling on his jacket, fumbling for his boots. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "If you go alone and something happens, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I let my best friend walk off to die because I was too scared to go with him. I can't live with that." "This is ridiculous," Eli hissed, but Mark could hear the crack in his resolve. "Is it more ridiculous than sneaking off alone?" They stared at each other in the darkness, and finally, Eli made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a groan. "Fine, but if you start complaining, I'm leaving you behind. Deal. They gathered their supplies as quietly as possible, backpacks already prepared, flashlights set to red light to preserve night vision, extra layers of clothing. Mark's pack felt absurdly heavy, but he didn't complain. Not yet. Slipping out of the tent was terrifying. Every small sound seemed amplified. The scrape of fabric, the crunch of pine needles, their careful footsteps past sleeping tents. Mark's pulse thundered in his ears so loudly he was certain everyone could hear it, but nobody stirred. They made it to the edge of camp, then into the tree line, then further, until the glow of the campfire was just a distant ember behind them. The forest at night was a different world. Without the sun filtering through the canopy, the woods transformed into a maze of shadows and strange shapes. Eli navigated with his GPS and compass, moving with surprising confidence, but Mark stumbled repeatedly, his expensive hiking boots catching on roots and rocks he couldn't see despite his flashlight. How far is it? Mark whispered after about 20 minutes of climbing steadily upward. About 3 miles to the coordinates I marked. But the terrain is rough, probably 2 or 3 hours of hiking. 2 or 3 hours, Mark's voice squeaked slightly. I thought you said it was close. It is close, for this kind of wilderness. Mark bit back a complaint, remembering his promise. The night air was cold, much colder than it had been at the lower elevation of their campsite. His breath came in visible puffs, and despite his jacket, he felt the chill seeping through. About 45 minutes into the hike, as they navigated a particularly steep section, Mark's complaints began in earnest. This is ridiculous, Mark panted, grabbing onto a tree trunk to pull himself up a rocky incline. We could have hired a helicopter to fly over this area. My dad's company has one. We could have been up here in 10 minutes, looked around from the air, been back in time for breakfast. Eli stopped and turned back, his flashlight illuminating Mark's flushed, frustrated face. You can't discover anything real from a helicopter, Mark. Why not? You'd see just as much. More actually, without all the trees in the way. Because archaeology isn't about flying over things and checking boxes. It's about being there, touching the ground, feeling the place. Eli's voice carried a frustration of his own. Not everything can be bought or made easier with money. That's easy for you to say when you're the one who wanted to do this. Mark shot back. I'm only here because I didn't want you to die alone. Then go back. I never asked you to come. They stared at each other in the darkness, breathing hard, the tension suddenly thick between them. Mark's expensive hiking boots, probably cost more than Eli's entire wardrobe, were already scuffed and muddy. His designer jacket had a tear in the sleeve from a branch. Everything about this experience was the opposite of the comfortable, controlled life he was used to. I can't go back alone, Mark finally admitted, his voice smaller. I'd get lost in 5 minutes. Eli's expression softened, then stop complaining about helicopters and keep walking. We're almost to the ridgeline. Almost. You said that an hour ago. This time I mean it. Mark groaned but continued climbing, muttering under his breath about rich people having the right idea about avoiding unnecessary suffering. They climbed higher as the night deepened around them. The terrain grew rougher, forcing them to scramble over boulders and navigate narrow paths along slopes that dropped away into darkness. Mark's legs burned, his lungs ached and sweat soaked through his layers despite the cold. Around 3 a.m., Eli suddenly stopped, studying his GPS intently. What is it? We're close. According to the historical reference, there should be unusual rock formations somewhere in this area, arranged in ways that suggest human construction. They began searching more carefully, sweeping their flashlights across the landscape. The eastern horizon was just beginning to show the faintest hint of pre-dawn gray. There, Eli pointed to their right. Mark followed his gaze and saw them. Large stones arranged in a rough semicircle, partially covered by centuries of soil and vegetation, but definitely too regular to be natural. His exhaustion momentarily forgotten, Mark felt a jolt of excitement. Holy crap, you were right. Eli was already moving toward the formation, his face lit with wonder. This is it. This is really it. They examined the stones, finding faint markings, weathered symbols that might have been decorative or might have been writing in a long-dead language. The formation was more extensive than it first appeared, continuing further into the hillside. We need to explore further, Eli said, his voice trembling with excitement. There might be more. There might be. A sound cut him off. Not an animal this time. Something else. A voice. Weak, hoarse, desperate. Help, someone. Please. Mark and Eli looked at each other, the same shock reflected in both faces. Did you hear that? Mark whispered. The voice came again, barely audible, coming from somewhere below them, in what looked like a crevice between large boulders. Help, down here. Without hesitation, Eli scrambled toward the sound. Mark followed, terror and adrenaline erasing his exhaustion. They reached the edge of a gap in the rocks, a natural split in the hillside, maybe 8 feet deep, partially hidden by overgrowth. Eli shined his flashlight down. At the bottom, half buried under a pile of rocks and dirt, was an old man. Oh my God, Mark breathed. There's someone down there. The man was elderly, 70 at least, with white hair matted with dirt and blood. His lower body was trapped under rocks. Even from above, they could see his face was pale with pain. Can you hear us? Eli called down, voice steady despite shock. The man's eyes fluttered open briefly. Yes, help. His eyes closed immediately. How long have you been down there? No response. He'd lost consciousness. We need to go down, Eli said, shrugging off his backpack. Wait. Mark grabbed his arm, panic rising. Shouldn't we call for help? Eli checked his phone. No signal. Then we go back. Mark, look at him. He doesn't have time for us to hike 3 hours back and wait for rescue. That's 6 hours minimum. But we don't know what we're doing. We could make it worse. What if we leave him and he dies? Eli's eyes locked with Mark's fierce. We can do this. Mark looked down at the old man, barely breathing. In his mind, he suddenly saw his father's face from last Thanksgiving, disappointed, critical. You've never had to work for anything, Mark. You fold under pressure. You'd never survive real hardship. I don't know if I can, Mark whispered. You can. I know you can. Eli gripped his shoulder. I need you. He needs you. Mark nodded, hands shaking. Okay, what do we do? They descended carefully, Eli finding handholds, then guiding Mark. Left foot there. Grab that ledge. Good. Mark's heart hammered. One slip meant falling 8 feet onto rocks. His soft hands already hurt from gripping rough stone. At the bottom, the severity became clear. The elderly man was pinned from waist down by rocks, softball-sized to massive boulders. Eli touched the man's shoulder gently. Sir, your name? The man's eyes opened to slits. Graham, he whispered, then eyes closed again. Graham, we're getting you out. No response. We need to move these rocks, Eli said, assessing the pile. Start with smaller ones. Carefully, we don't know what's keeping bigger ones stable. They began working. Mark grabbed his first rock, football-sized, and immediately felt how heavy it was. His soft hands struggled. He lifted it, moved it aside, reached for the next. His muscles burned within minutes. Sweat poured despite cold, but they kept going. Graham stirred occasionally, eyes opening briefly. Who are you? He mumbled once. We're here to help, Eli said quickly. Stay with us. Graham's eyes closed before responding. 10 minutes in, the first drops fell. No. Mark looked up. Please no. Within seconds, gentle drops became downpour. Thunder rumbled. Lightning flashed. Keep working. Eli shouted over growing storm. We have to get him out, before this floods. Rocks became slippery. Mark's hands, already raw, started bleeding. Water pooled around their feet, rising steadily. Then came the sound that made Mark's blood run cold. Grinding, shifting noise from above. The walls are unstable, Eli yelled. Rain's loosening everything. Small rocks tumbled down. One struck Mark's shoulder, making him cry out. Another hit Eli's back. They kept working, covering Graham's upper body with their jackets. This one's too heavy. Mark strained against a boulder pinning Graham's legs. I can't move it. Together. On 3. Eli positioned himself opposite. 1, 2, 3. They heaved. The boulder shifted slightly but didn't move. Again. They tried again. Mark's arms felt like tearing apart. Rain pounded down, mixing with his tears of frustration. In his mind, Mark heard his father. You're too weak, too soft. You've never had to fight for anything. I can't. Mark sobbed, hands slipping off wet rock. I'm not strong enough. Mark, Eli grabbed his face, forcing eye contact. Listen, you are strong enough. Not because of your body, because of your heart. Now lift. Something in Eli's conviction cut through Mark's panic. He grabbed the boulder again, planted his feet, pulled with everything he had. The boulder shifted, moved, rolled aside. Yes, Eli was already on the next rock. More debris fell, larger pieces now. A basketball-sized rock crashed inches from Graham's head. We're running out of time. Mark's voice was raw with terror. Lightning struck close, so close the thunder was instantaneous. In that flash, Mark saw how bad it was. Walls were crumbling. Water was ankle-deep and rising. They were going to die here. Mark's hands closed around the next rock. In his exhaustion, he was back in his father's office. 12 years old, told he wasn't trying hard enough. 15, told he was embarrassing the family. 18, told he'd never survive the real world. I'm not weak, Mark whispered. He lifted the rock, moved it. I'm not useless. Grabbed the next one. I'm not nothing. Together with Eli, they moved the final boulder, pinning Graham's legs. He's free. Eli checked Graham quickly, barely conscious, hypothermic. We need warm and dry. Now, there. Mark pointed through rain to a dark opening partially hidden by vines. A cave. Getting Graham to the cave was brutal. He weighed close to 180 pounds of dead weight. They each took a side, dragging him through flooded crevice while debris continued falling. Mark's legs gave out twice. The second time, he fell face first into muddy water. For a moment, he wanted to just lie there. But Eli was still standing, still holding Graham, still fighting. Mark got up. They made it to the cave just as another wall section collapsed behind them. Inside, they collapsed with Graham between them, all three gasping. Mark's entire body shook from cold, exhaustion, shock. His hands were destroyed, bleeding. He'd never been in this much pain. But they'd done it. Is he breathing? Mark managed. Eli checked Graham's pulse. Neck. Yes, barely. We need to warm him fast. They stripped Graham's wet clothes with trembling hands, replaced them with dry layers from packs. The old man's skin was dangerously cold, lips blue. He didn't wake. Graham. Eli patted his face gently. Can you hear me? Graham's eyes opened to slits. Cold, he whispered, then eyes closed again. Stay with us, Mark said, voice breaking. Please stay. We didn't pull you out just to lose you now. But Graham didn't respond. His breathing was shallow, heartbeat weak. Eli pulled out the emergency thermal blanket and wrapped Graham, then used their body heat, lying on either side. Outside, the storm continued, but inside they held on to this fragile life with everything left. Mark stared at the cave ceiling, body screaming in pain. He'd never worked this hard, never pushed past limits like this, never thought he was capable, and somewhere in his mind, a small voice, not his father's, but his own, whispered, maybe you're stronger than you thought. Graham's chest continued to rise and fall, barely, but enough. For now that was enough. The storm showed no signs of stopping. Outside, the world was nothing but water and violence. Inside, Eli refused to rest. Mark watched through exhaustion, as his friend moved with methodical purpose. Eli gathered dry branches and pine needles from deeper in the cave, arranged them with care. When did you learn all this? Mark asked, teeth chattering. Library books, YouTube videos. 1 week at youth camp when I was 11. Eli struck the fire starter, sending sparks into tinder. You learn fast when nobody's coming to save you. The words hung heavy. Mark had grown up with staff ready to solve problems, chefs, housekeepers, drivers, tutors. The idea of saving yourself was foreign. The fire caught, small at first. Eli fed it carefully, building it with patience. Gradually, genuine warmth spread through the cave. Graham was positioned closest to the fire, still wrapped in thermal blanket. His color was slightly better, though he remained unconscious. Eli checked his pulse regularly, adjusted the blanket. You're like a completely different person out here, Mark said, holding his bleeding hands toward flames. At school you're just quiet, normal, but this, you're like a wilderness expert. I'm not. I'm just doing what needs to be done. Eli sat back, allowing himself rest.
You helped too. You could have given up, but you didn't.
I almost did, about 50 times. But you didn't. That counts. They sat in silence listening to fire crackle and storm continue. Mark's mind drifted to his parents, who by now probably knew he was missing. What do you think happens now? Mark asked. When the storm clears, we get out and find high ground. Get cell signal. Call for rescue. How long until someone looks for us? They probably already are. When we didn't show for breakfast, Mitchell would notice. They'll search obvious areas first, then expand. Eli poked the fire. Could be hours, could be days. Days. Mark's voice cracked. We have water, food, fire, shelter. Eli looked at him steadily. We'll be okay. And him? Mark nodded toward Graham. I honestly don't know. As if summoned, Graham stirred. His eyes opened, unfocused, struggling to make sense of firelight. You're real. His voice was barely a whisper, raw. I thought. I dreamed you. Eli moved closer immediately. Yes sir, we're real. How do you feel? Like I was crushed by rocks and left to die. A weak smile. Which I was. What are your names? I'm Eli Turner. This is Mark Dawson. We're students at the university. Students. Graham's eyes closed briefly, then opened with effort. What on earth are students doing out here? Mark and Eli exchanged glances. It's complicated, Eli said. We were on a field trip. We left the group to look for an archaeological site. We heard you calling. Lucky for me you were foolish enough to be out here. Graham tried to shift and winced, face going pale. How bad is it? My legs. We got all the rocks off. We don't think anything's broken, but you've been trapped long. You're hypothermic, dehydrated, in shock. Eli offered water. We need to get you real medical attention soon, but for now, rest and stay warm. Graham drank gratefully, hands shaking so badly, Eli had to help. Thank you, both of you. You saved my life. We're not done yet, Eli said firmly. Rest now. Save your strength. But Graham seemed suddenly alert, studying Eli with intensity. You said you were looking for an archaeological site. Out here. Yes sir. I'd found references about indigenous artifacts and unusual rock formations in this area. Nothing confirmed. I wanted to see if it existed. Graham's face lit with something beyond relief, the joy of meeting a kindred spirit. And did you find it? We did. Stone formations in a semicircle, partially buried. Weathered markings. It looked promising, but we didn't get to examine thoroughly before we heard you. Eli's voice grew animated. Sir, are you Professor Graham Alder, the archaeologist? Graham's eyebrows rose. You know who I am. Know you. Professor, I've read every book you've published. Words tumbled out. Your work on pre-Columbian trading networks changed my understanding of early American history. Your New Mexico excavation in the 80s, finding proof of European contact decades before Columbus, that was revolutionary. Graham's eyes glistened, profound relief of being remembered. That excavation nearly killed me. I fought with the university for funding, fought with landowners, fought with other archaeologists who said I was crazy. But you were right. I was right. And it mattered to maybe 300 specialists who read academic journals. Graham laughed weakly, then coughed. Hardly legendary. It mattered to me, Eli said quietly but intensely. Your work showed me archaeology wasn't just about dead civilizations. It was about understanding how people lived, connected, survived. That's what I want to do. The old man's eyes filled with tears. Then you're a better man than most, Eli Turner. Mark had been listening with growing discomfort, the words highlighting everything he lacked. Passion, purpose, direction. Graham turned attention to Mark. And you, Mark Dawson, what brings you here? Mark felt his face flush. I'm just here because Eli is. I don't have a reason beyond that. That's not nothing. Following a friend into danger takes its own courage. Or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. Graham shifted, clearly in pain. What do you study? Business management. Following family footsteps, Mark wondered how he guessed. My father owns Dawson Property Group, real estate. He wants me to take over eventually. And do you want that? The question hung devastating. Did he want it? Mark had never seriously considered whether he wanted anything. I don't know. Mark admitted, voice small. I've never really thought about whether I want it. It's just what's expected. Graham studied him with sharp eyes. How old are you? 19. 19. The old man closed his eyes. When I was 19 I was poor as dirt, working construction to pay for night classes, sleeping in my car, eating one meal a day if lucky. He paused, gathering strength. But I absolutely knew that I was going to spend my life digging for answers nobody else cared about. That certainty saved me more times than I can count. I don't have that, Mark said. I don't have certainty about anything except I'm supposed to do what my parents expect. That's not certainty, son. That's a prison. The words hit Mark like a blow. A prison. Yes, that's exactly what it felt like. The fire burned lower. Eli added more wood, flames rising again. You boys should sleep, Graham said, voice fading. I'll be all right for now. One of us should stay awake, Eli said. Keep the fire going. I'll take first watch, Mark offered, surprising himself. You sure? Eli asked. Yeah, I'm too wired anyway. Eli nodded and settled against the wall. Within minutes his breathing deepened. Graham remained awake longer, watching Mark tend the fire. You're troubled, the old man said softly. I'm fine. You're clearly not fine, but that's all right. Being 19 and not fine is standard. Mark smiled despite himself. How did you know that you wanted archaeology? Graham was quiet. I was 7 when my grandfather took me to see Native American ruins in Arizona. Standing there, holding pottery shards someone had made 500 years ago, I felt connected to something bigger. Those people were dead and forgotten, but they'd left proof they existed, that they mattered. I wanted to find that proof, tell their stories. His eyes met Mark's. That feeling, that purpose, I've carried it every day since. But how did you stick with it when it was hard? When people said it was impractical? Because the alternative, living a safe life doing something I didn't care about, felt like dying slowly. Graham's words were deliberate. I'd rather die quickly chasing my passion than waste decades in comfortable misery. Then Graham's breathing evened into sleep, leaving Mark alone with fire and thoughts. Mark sat there feeding branches into flames, feeling like something inside him was cracking open. And for the first time, Mark Dawson felt truly deeply ashamed of who he was, but also buried under that shame, a tiny spark of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe. Morning came slowly, gray light filtering into the cave as the storm exhausted itself. Mark hadn't slept at all. He'd kept the fire going, watched over his sleeping companions while his mind spiraled through uncomfortable realizations. Eli woke first, sitting up with instant alertness. He immediately checked on Graham, who was still sleeping but whose breathing seemed stronger. You didn't sleep, Eli observed, studying Mark's face. Couldn't. Thinking too much. Something like that. Eli moved to the cave entrance, looking out at the transformed landscape. The rain had stopped, leaving everything dripping and misty. The sky was dull gray. We need to make a decision, Eli said. Try to climb out and find help, or wait for rescue. What do you think? I think Graham needs a hospital soon. Waiting could be dangerous, but climbing out with an injured man. Eli shook his head. I don't know if we can do it safely. Before Mark could respond, Graham stirred. His eyes opened, clearer than they'd been, though pain still etched lines across his face. Boys, he said, voice stronger. Good morning. I'm still alive, which surprises me. How do you feel? Eli asked, kneeling beside him. Like I was trampled by a herd of buffalo, but alive. Graham accepted more water, drank carefully. I heard you talking about getting out. You should go. Leave me here. Find help and send them back. We're not leaving you, Mark said immediately, surprising himself with conviction. Mark's right, Eli agreed. We stay together. Graham smiled, but it was sad. You're good boys, but I'm old and broken. You're young and strong. Don't throw your lives away for an old fool. You're not a fool, Eli said firmly. You're Professor Graham Alder. You've done more than most people could dream of. We're not letting you die in a cave. Even legendary archaeologists can die in caves, Eli. It's our occupational hazard. Graham tried to make it light, but everyone heard the fear. The fire had burned down. Mark added more wood, buying time. The comfortable numbness he'd lived in for 19 years had been stripped away, leaving him raw but strangely more alive. Can I ask you something? Mark said suddenly, turning to face Graham. Last night you said I should live for myself, not for what my parents want. But how? How do you just ignore everything you're supposed to do? How do you disappoint everyone who has expectations? Graham pulled himself up to sitting with visible effort, leaning against the cave wall. Eli helped adjust the blanket. The old man's face was drawn with pain, but his eyes were sharp. You think I didn't disappoint people? Graham said. My father wanted me to be a lawyer. My mother wanted me to marry her friend's daughter, and give her grandchildren. My first advisor told me archaeology was a dead-end field. I disappointed all of them. But weren't you scared? Didn't you feel guilty? Terrified? And yes, guilty as hell. For years, Graham shifted, wincing. Here's what nobody tells you: you can't live someone else's dream without slowly dying inside. Eventually that death shows. You become bitter, resentful, hollow. You hurt the people you were trying to please by becoming a shell of who you could have been. Mark felt tears burning. I don't know what I want, that's the problem. At least you knew you wanted archaeology. I don't know anything. Then find out. How? By trying things. By failing. By being uncomfortable. Graham's voice grew intense. Mark, you're standing at a crossroads. One path is safe. Do what your father wants. Inherit the company. Live a life of comfort and security. The other path is uncertain. Figure out what makes you feel alive and chase it, even if it scares you. Both are valid, but you have to choose. Not choosing is still a choice, and it's usually the worst one. Eli had been listening quietly, but now he spoke. Mark, can I say something? Sure. I've known you for 9 months. You're one of the smartest people I've met, but you act like you're not. You're genuinely kind, but you hide it behind not caring about anything. You have resources that could change the world, but you waste them on designer clothes and expensive drinks at clubs you don't even enjoy. Eli's voice wasn't harsh, just honest. I've watched you go through life like you're waiting for it to start. But this is it. This is your life, right now. The words hit harder because they came from Eli, who never judged. Mark's vision blurred with tears. I'm scared, he admitted, voice breaking. I'm scared that if I disappoint my father, he'll disown me. I'm scared that if I try to be my own person, I'll fail and prove I never had anything real to offer. I'm scared I'm exactly as empty and useless as I feel. Oh Mark, Graham's voice was gentle. Fear is the only thing we all share. Rich, poor, young, old, we're all terrified. The difference is what you do with that fear. I don't know what to do with it. Then start small. Take one risk. Make one decision based on what you want, not what's expected. See how it feels. Like what? Graham gestured around the cave. Like this. You risked everything to help your friend chase a dream. You risked more to help save a dying old man. Those weren't things the Mark you described would do, but you did them anyway. That was different. That was an emergency. No, Eli said quietly. That was you. The real you. Maybe for the first time. Mark wiped his eyes roughly, embarrassed but unable to stop the tears. Everything felt too raw. But beneath the discomfort was something else, a tiny spark of hope. I don't want to go into real estate, Mark said suddenly, words tumbling out. I hate it. I've sat in on board meetings at my dad's company, and I wanted to die from boredom. Buildings and contracts and profit margins, none of it means anything to me. Then what does? Graham asked. I don't know, but sitting here listening to you and Eli talk about archaeology, about discoveries, about adding to human knowledge, that sounds like it means something. That sounds like living. So study archaeology. I can't just why not, because. Mark struggled for reasons that suddenly felt hollow. Because it's not practical, because archaeologists don't make money, because my father would lose his mind. All true, Graham agreed. So it comes down to this: would you rather be practical, wealthy and miserable, or impractical, probably broke, and possibly happy? Before Mark could answer, Eli cut in, voice excited. Wait, Mark, you don't have to choose between them. What do you mean? You've got something I'll never have: resources, connections, money. What if you did both? Learn business from your father, but use it to fund archaeological research, start a foundation, support digs that need funding. Use your privilege for something that matters instead of just inheriting it. The idea hit Mark like lightning. He could almost see it, A future where he didn't have to completely abandon his family's expectations, but could reshape them into something meaningful. That could actually work, Mark said slowly, mind racing. My dad always says business is about leverage and vision. What if my vision was different than his? What if indeed, Graham said smiling despite obvious pain. Now you're thinking like someone who wants to live. The conversation was interrupted by a sound from outside, distant but distinct. A helicopter. All three froze, listening. The sound grew louder, echoing off canyon walls. They're searching for us. Eli jumped up, scrambling toward the cave entrance, but just as quickly, the helicopter sound faded, moving away. No. Eli climbed partially out, waving his arms frantically, but the helicopter was already too far. He slumped back, disappointed. They didn't see us. They'll come back, Graham said. They're doing a grid search. Eventually they'll search this area. Eventually might be too late for you, Mark said, looking at the old man with new eyes. He couldn't let this person die. Not the man who'd just shown him what it meant to really live. We have to do something, Mark said, standing with sudden determination. We can't just wait. Eli looked at him in surprise. What are you suggesting? We get him to high ground, where we can signal the helicopter when it comes back, where cell phones might work. Mark, that's insane. He can barely move. Then we help him move. We're both strong enough. We'll take it slow, but we have to try. Graham watched with growing emotion. Mark, an hour ago you were scared of everything. Now you're suggesting we attempt a dangerous climb. An hour ago I was scared of living. Now I'm more scared of letting you die. Mark crouched beside Graham. Professor, you just spent the last hour telling me to choose life over safety. Well, this is me choosing. We're getting you out of here. Tears rolled down Graham's weathered face. You foolish, brave boy. Eli looked between them, then nodded slowly. Okay, we try, but carefully. One wrong move, and all three of us could die. Then we won't make a wrong move. They spent 20 minutes preparing. Eli used rope to create a makeshift harness around Graham's torso. They wrapped him warmly, packed supplies and carefully extinguished the fire. The climb out of the crevice was going to be the hardest thing any of them had ever attempted. But for the first time in his life, Mark wasn't thinking about how hard it would be. He was thinking about why it mattered, and that made all the difference. Getting Graham out of the crevice took almost an hour. Every movement was agonizing. For him, because his battered body protested every shift, and for Eli and Mark, because one wrong step could send all three tumbling back down. They devised a system. Eli climbed up first, securing himself at the top. Mark stayed below, supporting Graham's weight and guiding his feet to handholds. Then using the rope harness, they slowly hauled the old man upward, while Mark pushed from below. Graham's face was gray with pain, his breathing ragged, but he never complained. Not once. Almost there, Eli grunted, his arms shaking with effort, as he pulled on the rope. Just a few more feet, Professor. Mark's shoulders burned like fire. His hands were bloody from gripping rocks. Sweat poured down his face, despite cold morning air. But he kept pushing, kept lifting, kept moving. Finally, impossibly, Graham's torso cleared the edge. Eli grabbed him under the arms and pulled him onto solid ground. Mark scrambled up behind them, collapsing onto his back, gasping for breath. We did it, Mark panted. Holy crap, we actually did it. But there was no time to rest. They needed high ground, needed to be visible for when the helicopter returned. Eli consulted his GPS. There's a ridge about half a mile east, he said. It's the highest point in this area. If we can get there, we'll be visible for miles. Half a mile. Mark looked at Graham, who could barely sit up. That might as well be 100 miles. Then we make it a very slow half mile. They fashioned a stretcher using Eli's emergency tarp and 2 sturdy branches. They lifted Graham onto it carefully, and each took an end. The trek began. The terrain was brutal, rocky, uneven, still slippery from rain. They had to navigate around boulders, climb over fallen logs, ford small streams swollen with runoff. Mark's legs trembled with exhaustion. His vision kept blurring. But every time he wanted to stop, he looked at Eli's determined face, or heard Graham's labored breathing, and he found strength he didn't know he possessed. They fell twice, sending Graham sliding off the stretcher. Each time they carefully repositioned him, apologizing profusely while he weakly insisted he was fine. The sun rose higher, breaking through cloud cover in shafts of brilliant light. The forest began to sparkle as rain evaporated, creating millions of tiny rainbows in the moisture-laden air. How much further? Mark gasped after what felt like hours. 200 yards, maybe less. Eli's voice was strained. Come on, we can do this. They pushed forward, muscles screaming. Mark's hands were cramping on the makeshift stretcher poles. His back felt like it might snap. But the ridge was getting closer, a rocky outcropping that jutted above the tree line. 100 yards, 50, 25. They crested the ridge and nearly collapsed with relief. The view was staggering, miles of forested mountains spreading out in every direction, valleys filled with morning mist, distant peaks still capped with snow. But more importantly, they were exposed, visible. Any search helicopter passing nearby would see them. They set Graham down as gently as possible. The old man's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, but he was still alive. Now what? Mark asked, dropping to his knees. Now we make ourselves impossible to miss. Eli pulled out his emergency signal mirror, and a bright orange tarp. Help me spread this out. They stretched the tarp across the rocks, weighing down the corners with stones. The orange was searingly bright against gray rock. Then Eli showed Mark how to use the signal mirror, angling it to catch and reflect sunlight. If the helicopter comes back, flash this toward them. 3 short flashes, pause, repeat. That's SOS in Morse code. What if they don't come back? They will. They have to. So they waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. The sun climbed higher, warming the rocks. Mark sat beside Graham, who had drifted into unconsciousness. Eli paced the ridge, scanning the sky constantly. Before Mark could respond, they heard it, the distant thump of helicopter rotors. There, Eli pointed to the sky, where a small speck was growing larger. Mark grabbed the signal mirror with shaking hands, angling it toward the sun, flashing the SOS pattern. 3 short flashes, pause. 3 more. The helicopter was closer now, following a search pattern, but it hadn't turned toward them yet. Keep flashing, Eli shouted, jumping up and down on the orange tarp, waving his arms wildly. Mark flashed the mirror frantically, his heart pounding. Please see us. Please, please see us. The helicopter continued on its path, and for a horrible moment, Mark thought it would pass them by again. But then beautifully, miraculously, it banked sharply, and turned directly toward their ridge. They see us. Eli grabbed Mark in a fierce hug. They see us. The helicopter approached rapidly, its rotors creating a thunderous wind that whipped at their clothes and hair. It couldn't land on the rocky ridge, but a door slid open, and a rescue worker in bright orange gear appeared with a harness. The next 30 minutes were a blur of activity. The rescue worker descended on a cable, quickly assessed Graham's condition, and radioed for a medical evacuation basket. They secured Graham first, lifting him up into the helicopter with practiced efficiency, then Eli, then finally Mark. As Mark rose into the air, suspended beneath the helicopter, he looked down at the ridge where they'd waited, at the orange tarp still spread across the rocks, at the vast wilderness that had nearly killed them but had somehow also saved them. Now safe in the helicopter with Eli beside him, and paramedics working on Graham, Mark looked out the window at the mountains bathed in golden morning light. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, not because of the colors, or the majesty of nature, but because he was alive to see it. Because he'd done something real, something that mattered. Because for the first time in his privileged, comfortable, meaningless life, he'd truly lived. Graham was awake now, oxygen mask over his face, but his eyes were open and alert. He looked at Mark and Eli, and even through the plastic mask, they could see him smiling. The old man reached out a trembling hand. Mark took it, feeling the grip weak but present, alive. They flew toward the valley where ambulances waited,
where Professor Mitchell was probably having a nervous breakdown, where Mark's parents would be furious and relieved in equal measure, but none of that mattered right now. Right now, suspended between earth and sky, Mark Dawson felt something he'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that his life had just begun. The landing zone was chaos. 3 ambulances, 2 police cars, a fire truck, and half the university staff crowded the clearing. The moment the rotors began to slow, paramedics swarmed in. Graham was transferred to a gurney first, medical personnel shouting about vitals and possible internal bleeding. Eli and Mark were checked quickly, dehydrated, exhausted. Mark's hands wrapped in bandages, Eli's head wound dressed, then wrapped in thermal blankets.
Professor Mitchell burst through the crowd, her face tear-stained and furious. "Where have you been? Do you have any idea what you've put everyone through? We've had search teams out all night. They found Professor Graham Alder," Eli interrupted, voice hoarse. "He was trapped in a crevice. We saved his life." That brought everyone to a halt. Graham Alder, a park ranger, stepped forward, disbelief evident. "The archaeologist, we've been searching for him for 3 days. He's right there." Mark pointed to the gurney being loaded into an ambulance. The ranger immediately radioed this information. Suddenly the energy shifted. What had been a rescue for 2 missing students became a legitimate emergency, maybe even a heroic story. Professor Mitchell's anger deflated slightly. "We'll discuss consequences later. Right now, hospital, both of you." At the hospital they were separated into different rooms. A doctor checked Mark: severe dehydration, exhaustion, lacerations requiring stitches, badly bruised shoulders. A police officer took his statement, then a Park Service official, then a university administrator. Then came the waiting. Mark's phone finally charged, exploded with notifications. 53 missed calls, 87 messages, most from his mother. "Where are you? Please call. We're so worried." Several from his father: "Call me immediately. This is unacceptable." Before Mark could respond, his hospital room door opened. His parents entered, his mother rushing forward, his father following slowly, face tight with controlled anger. Mark, his mother embraced him carefully. "Oh my God, we were so scared. We thought you died." "I'm fine, Mom. Really." She pulled back, studying his bandaged hands, his exhaustion. "You don't look fine." His father finally spoke, voice cold and clipped. "What exactly were you thinking? Leaving your group in the middle of the night, wandering into the wilderness? Do you have any concept of how irresponsible that was?" "Richard," Mark's mother tried to intervene. "No, Caroline, absolutely now. Our son disappeared for 36 hours. The university called at 3 a.m. We've been sitting in that waiting room thinking he was dead." His voice cracked slightly, revealing emotion beneath anger. "I'm sorry," Mark said, and he meant it. "But Dad, we saved someone's life. I don't care if you saved the president. You broke rules, you endangered yourself. We weren't the ones who needed rescuing. Professor Graham Alder did. He'd been trapped for days. If we hadn't found him, he would have died. That's not your responsibility. You're a 19-year-old college student, so I should have just left him there." They stared at each other, the familiar pattern, his father demanding compliance, Mark resisting. But something was different this time. Mark wasn't backing down. "Dad, I know you're angry. I know I broke rules, but I don't regret what I did. For the first time in my life I did something that mattered. Something real. And you know what? It felt better than anything I've ever done to make you happy." The words hung in the air. His mother's eyes widened, his father's face went very still. "What are you saying?" his father asked quietly. "I'm saying, I don't want to go into real estate. I don't want to take over your company. I don't want the life you've planned for me." "Mark," his mother started. "I don't know exactly what I want yet, but I know I want it to matter. I want to do something about more than profit margins. I want to wake up excited about what I'm doing." His father's face had gone red. "And you figured all this out during one weekend of playing hero?" "Yes, because I met someone who showed me what a real life looks like. Someone who's lived more in 74 years than I have in 19. This is ridiculous. You're exhausted and emotional. Once you've rested." "No, Dad, this isn't exhaustion talking. This is me, finally, actually having something to say." The silence was deafening. His father's hands were clenched into fists. "We'll discuss this at home," his father finally said, voice ice. "When you're thinking clearly." "I am thinking clearly, For the first time in my life. His father turned and walked out without another word. His mother lingered, expression pained. Mark, honey, I'm glad you're safe, and I'm proud of you, for saving that man. But you have to understand, your father has built his entire life expecting you to continue what he started. I know, Mom, but I'm devastated too. I've been devastated my whole life, just in a different way. I can't keep living for his dreams. She nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. I know, this is going to be hard. Everything worthwhile is hard. Someone taught me that. She kissed his forehead and left. The story hit the news within hours. Some headlines were positive. College students rescue legendary archaeologist, but others were harsh. Reckless students trigger massive search operation. One editorial was scathing. While we're relieved Professor Alder was found alive, we must question whether these students should face charges for triggering a search operation that cost $23,000. When Mark checked his email, there was one from the university. You are gent mid-disciplinary hearing. You are required to attend Thursday at 2 p.m. Potential consequences include probation, suspension or expulsion. Mark showed it to Eli when they finally saw each other. They might expel us, Eli said quietly, face going pale. Mark, I could lose my scholarship, everything. They won't. We saved someone's life. That doesn't erase what we did wrong. Eli looked more worried than Mark had ever seen. You have money, you'll be fine. Your dad can pay for another school. But if I get expelled, I'm done. I can't afford tuition anywhere else. The reality hit Mark hard. His decision might destroy his best friend's future. I won't let that happen, Mark said firmly. If anyone takes the fall, it's me. The next morning, Mark's father came to his room alone. The park service sent me an invoice, his father said, voice flat. $23,467 for search and rescue. Dad, I'm paying it, his father interrupted. Not because you deserve it, but because I don't want this hanging over you. Your mother insisted. She said you were brave, that you saved someone's life. Mark was stunned. You're paying it. I think you were reckless and foolish, but I also think you did something I'm not sure I would have done. Something that took real courage. It was the closest to approval Mark had ever heard from his father about something Mark chose. The disciplinary hearing came Thursday. Mark and Eli sat facing a panel of 5 administrators. Mr. Dawson, Mr. Turner, you violated multiple university policies. You left campus without authorization, endangered yourselves, necessitated costly emergency response. What do you have to say? Eli spoke first. We understand we broke rules. We're genuinely sorry for the worry and expense. But we found a man who was dying. Professor Alder had been trapped for 3 days. If we'd waited for official rescue, he would have died. We had to make a choice, and we chose to try to save his life. That's not your job, one administrator said sharply. You're students, not rescue personnel. But we didn't, Mark interrupted. We made it out, all 3 of us, and Professor Alder is alive because we were there. The panel conferred in whispers. Then the dean spoke. The university has received significant positive media attention from your actions. Alumni have made donations referencing pride in students who take action. From a public relations standpoint, expelling you would be disastrous. Mark felt hope flicker. However, we cannot ignore serious violations. Therefore, you will both receive official reprimands on your records. 80 hours of mandatory community service with local search and rescue. Wilderness safety certification before any future field trips. Formal letters of apology to Professor Mitchell and all students on the trip. She paused. No suspension, no expulsion. But any future violation will result in immediate dismissal. Do you accept these terms? Yes, Mark and Eli said in unison, relief flooding through them. Walking out into autumn sunshine, Eli actually laughed with relief. We did it. I still have my scholarship. Mark felt something unexpected hope. The semester after the rescue was strange. Mark and Eli were campus celebrities. Some students treated them like heroes. Others rolled their eyes. But the attention faded quickly. The real changes were quieter, deeper. Mark officially changed his major to anthropology with a business minor. His father didn't speak to him for 3 weeks. His mother sent care packages and encouraging texts, playing mediator. But Mark wasn't waiting for permission anymore. He threw himself into his new studies with intensity that surprised his professors. For the first time, he was genuinely interested in what he was learning. Eli had become a minor celebrity in the archaeology department. Graduate students wanted his story. Professors invited him to advanced seminars, and Graham Alder's influence opened doors. But the biggest change came 6 months later, during spring break. Graham had been released from the hospital, returned to his modest home, and insisted Mark and Eli visit regularly. They'd fallen into a routine, Sunday dinners at Graham's house. One particular Sunday in March, Graham had an unusual glint in his eye. "I have a proposal for you two," Graham said, setting down his fork. "I've been thinking about this for months." "What kind of proposal?" Eli asked. "I'm old. I'm 76 now, and I don't have many years left. I need to think about legacy, about what happens to my work when I'm gone." He pulled out a folder filled with maps, research notes, photographs. "I've spent 50 years researching pre-Columbian sites across the Southwest. I have documentation on at least a dozen sites that have never been excavated. Some could rewrite our understanding of ancient trade networks." "This is incredible," Eli breathed, flipping through pages. "It's incomplete," Graham said. "I don't have energy or time to finish alone. But you two, you have passion, skills, and," he looked at Mark meaningfully, "resources to do something real with this." "What are you suggesting?" Mark asked. "Build something together, a real organization dedicated to this work. Not just funding research, actually doing it. Leading expeditions, publishing findings, training the next generation." Graham's eyes were bright. "Mark, you've been researching non-profit structures. What if you thought bigger, created an organization that combined funding with actual fieldwork, like an independent research institute?" Eli asked, leaning forward. "Exactly. Small, focused elite. You'd fund projects, but you'd also lead them. Archaeologists, anthropologists, business managers, all working toward the same goal." Mark's mind raced. "That's ambitious. We're still in school, so build it while you're in school. Start small. One project, one site. Prove the concept." Graham pushed the folder toward them. "I'm offering you my life's work as foundation, my research, my contacts, my name to open doors. I want to be part of this while I'm alive." Mark and Eli looked at each other. This was it. This was the future they'd been searching for. "We'll need a name," Eli said slowly, smiling. "What about the Heritage Initiative?" Graham suggested. "Simple, clear, focused on preserving history for future generations." "The Heritage Initiative," Mark repeated. "I like it." Over the next 2 years while finishing their degrees, they built it piece by piece. Mark used a portion of his trust fund, $50,000 to start. Graham contributed his research archive and academic contacts. Eli contributed vision and archaeological expertise. They registered as a non-profit, filed paperwork, created a board, Graham as founding director, Mark as executive director, Eli as research director, plus 2 professors Graham trusted. Their first project was a return expedition to the site where they'd found Graham. The summer after sophomore year, they returned to Mount Harrison with proper permits, equipment, and a small team. What they found exceeded expectations. The stone formations were part of a larger complex, clear evidence of a significant pre-Columbian gathering site with artifacts, suggesting trade connections spanning hundreds of miles. The findings earned them a publication in a respected journal, co-authored by Graham Alder, Eli Turner, and Mark Dawson. Mark had never felt prouder. By graduation, the Heritage Initiative had completed 3 expeditions, published 2 papers, and built a reputation as a serious organization. At their graduation ceremony, Mark's father attended. They hadn't fully reconciled, but they'd reached a detente. After the ceremony, his father pulled him aside. "I've been thinking about your foundation, the Heritage Initiative." "Yeah." Mark braced for criticism. "You need better liability insurance. Your grant management structure is inefficient." His father handed him a business card. "Call this firm. They specialize in non-profit operations. They'll help you run it properly." Mark stared at the card. "You looked into our operations." "Of course. You're my son. Just because I don't understand why you want to dig in dirt, doesn't mean I can't help you do it well." His father's expression softened. "I'm proud of you, Mark. You're building something real. That takes courage I'm not sure I ever had."
It was the first time his father had said those words. "I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Dad." They shook hands, not a hug yet, but more warmth than they'd shared in years. Meanwhile, Eli had been offered positions at 3 graduate programs, all fully funded. He'd chosen to stay local, enrolled in the doctoral program while continuing with the initiative part-time. "I can do both," Eli explained. "The initiative needs someone with real academic credentials. If I have a PhD, if I'm publishing in top journals, it gives us legitimacy." The Heritage Initiative grew. By their 3rd year out of college, Mark 25, Eli 25, Graham 79, they had a small office, 2 full-time staff, and an annual budget of $200,000. They'd completed 8 expeditions, published 7 papers, and were training the next generation. Graham's health was declining. He couldn't participate in fieldwork anymore, spent more time in and out of hospital, but his mind stayed sharp, and he remained involved in every project. "You boys are doing what I always dreamed of," Graham told them one evening, voice weak but content. "You're making real contributions, building something that will last. You're not going anywhere yet," Mark said. "When I do, promise me something. Keep growing this. Build it into something that outlives all of us. Build it into an institution." "We promise," Eli and Mark said together. Graham Alder died peacefully in his sleep on a Tuesday morning, in early autumn, 8 years after 2 college students had pulled him from a mountain crevice and given him a second chance at life. He was 82. He'd published 4 more papers in those final years, mentored 24 students through the Heritage Initiative, and saw his work finally receive recognition it deserved. He'd attended Mark's wedding. He'd been there when Eli earned his doctorate. He'd lived to see the summit photo of him at high camp on Mount McKinley, featured in National Geographic. The funeral was held at the University Chapel, a small stone building with stained glass windows that painted afternoon light in colors of amber and blue. Despite Graham's years of relative obscurity, before the rescue, the chapel was packed. Former students, fellow archaeologists, university faculty, Heritage Initiative staff, and in the front row, reserved seats, Mark and Eli. Mark had flown in from Boston, where the initiative had recently opened its East Coast office. Eli had come from Arizona, where he was leading a major excavation, the culmination of Graham's life work. Both dropped everything the moment they heard. Neither questioned whether they'd attend. Graham had become family. The service was beautiful in its simplicity. Colleagues shared stories of Graham's groundbreaking work, his stubborn dedication, his terrible jokes that somehow made excavation teams laugh. Students spoke about his teaching, how he made ancient civilizations feel real. His ex-wives, both of them attended and shared fond memories. But when the time came for the final speakers, the officiant called Mark and Eli to the front. They hadn't prepared formal remarks. They'd talked the night before, but words had failed them. "How do you summarize what someone meant to your entire life?" Mark spoke first, his voice surprisingly steady despite emotion pressing against his chest. 8 years ago, Eli and I were stupid college kids who thought we were on an adventure. We thought we were looking for ancient ruins or academic glory, or just something exciting. What we found was Graham. He paused, looking at the closed casket at the front, draped with wildflowers from the southwest. "Graham once told me that the difference between existing and living is purpose, that you could have all the comfort and security in the world and still be dying inside if you weren't pursuing something you believed in." Mark's voice caught. "I was 19 and I had everything. Money, opportunity, a future handed to me on a silver platter. And I was absolutely miserable because none of it meant anything. Graham taught me that meaning isn't given to you. You have to create it." Tears were flowing freely now, but Mark kept talking. "We only knew him for 8 years. Some people here knew him for decades. But in those 8 years he changed the entire trajectory of my life. He showed me what it means to live with passion and purpose. He taught me that legacy isn't about wealth or status, it's about the lives you touch and the knowledge you leave behind." Mark's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Teacher, thank you. Thank you for saving my life by letting me save yours." He stepped back, and Eli moved forward. Eli, who was usually so composed, looked shattered. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face drawn with grief. "I don't have fancy words," Eli started, voice rough. "I'm better with artifacts than eulogies. But Graham deserves more than silence. He took a shaky breath. I grew up poor. I grew up black in places where that mattered in all the wrong ways. I grew up being told archaeology wasn't for people like me, that I should be practical, choose a field where I could make money, where I'd be welcomed. Graham never said any of that. When he looked at me, he just saw an archaeologist. Not a poor kid, not a diversity checkbox, just someone who loved the work as much as he did. Eli's voice strengthened as he continued. He gave me opportunities I never could have earned on my own. Not because I saved his life, he paid that debt 100 times over, but because he believed in me. He saw something in a terrified 19-year-old kid stumbling through a mountain forest, and he decided to invest in that person's future. Eli smiled through his tears. That's who Graham was. He invested in futures, in possibilities, in the next generation carrying forward work that mattered. He pulled something from his pocket, a photograph, enlarged and mounted on foam board. It showed 3 men standing on a rocky ridge at sunrise, the sky behind them painted in brilliant oranges and reds. Graham in the middle supported by Mark and Eli on either side, all 3 smiling despite obvious exhaustion and injuries. We took this photo the morning we were rescued, Eli said, holding it up. Graham said it was the most beautiful sunrise he'd ever seen, because he was alive to witness it. Because 2 foolish students had cared enough to risk their lives for an old man they'd just met. He set the photograph on top of the casket, leaning it against the flowers. We wanted to give you something, teacher, something to take with you. Mark came forward with a second photograph. This one showed a different mountain summit, higher, more dramatic, the peak they'd always talked about conquering together. Eli and Mark stood at the top, holding a banner that read, "For Graham Alderiou, taught us to climb." We summited Mount McKinley last summer, Mark explained, voice thick with emotion. The mountain you always said you'd climb someday. We carried your picture with us to the top. We left it there in a waterproof case, facing the sunrise you loved. He placed this photograph beside the first. You didn't make it there in body, but you were with us in every other way that matters. The chapel was silent except for quiet crying. Even the officiant dabbed at his eyes. Graham, you told us that people don't die as long as they're remembered, Eli said. That ancient civilizations live on because archaeologists refuse to let them be forgotten. Well, we refuse to let you be forgotten. Your work continues. Your students are teaching their own students now. Your discoveries are in textbooks. Your passion is alive in everyone you touched. Mark and Eli looked at each other, and in that moment everyone could see the bond between them, forged in crisis, strengthened over years, permanent in a way few friendships become. Sometimes people come into your life for just a moment, Mark said quietly, but they change everything that comes after. You were our moment, Graham, and everything good in our lives, every meaningful thing we've done, started that night on a mountain when we found you. They placed their hands on the casket, a final goodbye to the man who'd saved them by letting them save him. The service ended with a recording of Graham's voice, from a lecture years ago, talking about why archaeology mattered. His warm, slightly raspy voice filled the chapel. We dig in the dirt because we refuse to forget. We spend years reconstructing a single pot because that pot tells us someone lived, someone ate breakfast, someone had hopes and fears and loved their children. That's what we do. We remember. We honor. We say you existed. You mattered. Your life had meaning. As they filed out following the casket to the cemetery, Mark and Eli walked side by side, neither speaking but both thinking the same thing. Graham had spent his life remembering the forgotten. Now it was their turn to remember him. The burial was simple. Colleagues and students took turns dropping handfuls of earth on the casket. Mark and Eli went last, standing together at the edge of the grave. I'm going to miss him, Mark said quietly. Me too, every day. You think we did right by him, by living the way he taught us? Eli smiled, sad but genuine. I think we're still living it. The lessons don't end just because the teacher's gone. They stood there long after everyone else had left, watching the cemetery workers complete their task. The afternoon sun slanted through trees, creating patterns of light and shadow across freshly turned earth. Finally, as the workers departed and they were completely alone, Eli pulled out one more item, a small plastic bag containing soil from the summit of Mount McKinley. from the spot where they'd left Graham's picture. He should have some of his mountain with him, Eli said, sprinkling the soil across the grave. Mark nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. They left as the sun was setting, walking through cemetery gates back toward the world where they'd continue Graham's legacy, where they'd build on his foundation, where they'd teach their own students about passion and purpose and the courage to live meaningfully. Behind them, the two photographs remained on the grave marker, one of a rescue that had saved 3 lives, one of a summit that honored the teacher who taught them to climb. And somewhere, Mark liked to believe, Graham Alder was smiling at his sunrise, proud of the 2 young men who'd learned his most important lesson, that sometimes the greatest discovery you can make isn't about ancient civilizations or lost treasures. Sometimes it's discovering who you're meant to be and having the courage to become that person, no matter how difficult the climb.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.